On this Wednesday night, impatience with rule breakers. One province's promise of hefty fines and tighter restrictions.
They're going to be the highest in the country.
And the solution to long waits for COVID-19 tests and results. As two federal political leaders go into self-isolation, the impact on Parliament Hill. Crude awakening the oil industry's gloomy forecast and how companies are adapting. A slow-moving storm assaults the Gulf Coast.
We're going to try to survive this.
The danger from Hurricane Sally. And from playing defense to defending a man wrongfully convicted.
She's such an amazing, beautiful person.
A love story that blossomed during a fight for freedom.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. If you're still not getting the message about the risk of COVID-19 spreading, there are some clear signs tonight you should pay attention to. Ontario, where daily case numbers are rising in 3 regions, including Toronto, the Premier is getting ready to bring the hammer down. Tighter limits on social gatherings and bigger fines are coming.
There's going to be some severe fines for people who want to ignore the regulations and the guidelines, so it's going to be severe. They're going to be the highest in the country, and they're going to be under provincial jurisdiction. It's not going to be under federal jurisdiction, so we'll make sure that they're followed through.
The virus is still spreading. The federal opposition leader and the leader of the Bloc Québécois are now self-isolating because people close to them have tested positive. We'll have more on that in just a moment. First, here's a snapshot of new cases in Canada today. Both Ontario and Quebec recorded more than 300 new infections, their highest daily new caseloads in months. Out west, there were 171 new cases in Alberta and 122 in BC. A critical number to watch is how many people need to be hospitalized. Right now, the number of COVID-19 patients admitted to hospitals in the 4 largest provinces is far below the peaks in the spring. But in some regions, the number of severely ill people is creeping up. In Ontario, 44 people with COVID-19 are in the hospital. 20 of them are in intensive care. In BC, 60 people are in the hospital, 23 in ICU. With case numbers climbing, the demand for COVID-19 tests is skyrocketing in parts of this country. In places like Toronto and Ottawa, people are waiting in line for hours outside testing centres. Once they finally get the test, it's then taking days to get the results. Jeff Semple reports on the backlog and what's being done to fix it.
How do you feel about not going to school today?
Tugba Tass's 5-year-old woke up on her first day of school with a runny nose, a possible symptom of COVID-19.
It's probably just a cold. Public health said to get tested if you want her to come back.
But they arrived at their local testing center to this, hundreds in line, with reported wait times at some Ottawa centers of up to 8 hours.
And I'm just glad today's a really nice weather and we're outdoors, but I can't imagine going through this in winter.
These long, anxious lineups are playing out across the country, particularly in Ontario, as children head back to school, their parents to work, while others with no symptoms are looking to socialize safely.
I'm going up to see some people, so they wanted a test to feel more safe.
The result? Some patients turned away, others waiting hours in line and up to 10 days for results.
They could do it at home. It could be done in a fraction of the time that the current test is being done in.
This Toronto dentistry professor says there's a better way. COVID-19 tests which can be conducted at home using saliva instead of an uncomfortable nasal swab. The sample then sent to a lab. Other so-called rapid antigen tests can produce results at home in less than an hour, including one being developed in Saskatchewan.
It's like a pregnancy test that is change the color when you are positive.
The saliva and rapid testing technologies have already been deployed in several countries, including the United States, but are still waiting for approval from health authorities in Canada.
In Canada, we're very careful, and that's fine, but we're in a pandemic situation.
In an emailed written statement, a spokesperson for Health Canada notes lingering concerns around the reliability of some of those at-home COVID-19 tests, adding that they are assessing all applications as quickly as possible without compromising patient safety. In the meantime, the Ontario government is now planning to partner with local pharmacies in hopes of doubling its testing capacity. Donna?
All right, Jeff Semple in Toronto, thanks. The federal Conservative leader, Erin O'Toole, and his family is among those getting tested for COVID-19 because one of his staff has the virus. And the Bloc Québécois leader, Yves-François Blanchet, is in self-isolation because his wife has tested positive. It is a live issue right now at the heart of Parliament and with a throne speech just a week away. Our Ottawa Bureau Chief Mercedes Stephenson is with me. Mercedes, what do we know about O'Toole and Blanchet?
Well, Donna, it's a reminder that there is no such thing as being safe from potential COVID-19 exposure, whether you are the Prime Minister or a party leader. The risk is now top of mind as COVID-19 has arrived on Parliament Hill, and there is an unprecedented possibility of 2 opposition leaders or numerous MPs being absent from a confidence vote. The speech from the throne is a critical moment for any government, but especially in minority parliaments. The vote that follows can bring down a government. It's unclear whether Conservative leader Erin O'Toole or Bloc leader Yves-François Blanchet, or most of the Bloc caucus for that matter, will be out of self-isolation in time for the vote. O'Toole and his family are in isolation tonight after an O'Toole staffer traveling with the leader tested positive. O'Toole's Twitter account showed this photo of him driving back from Montreal with staff earlier this week, not wearing a mask. The opposition leader's office put out a press release saying he would be tested on Wednesday, but refused to confirm to Global News whether or not that test had happened. The leader's office is now reaching out to everyone O'Toole was in contact with in recent days, including Quebec Premier François Legault, who says he is not being tested right now on the advice of public health officials, despite this face-to-face meeting with no masks on Monday. The concerns come just one day after a guard in the Parliamentary Protective Service was diagnosed with COVID-19, triggering a review of the security service's COVID policies. Donna, as for the throne speech, MPs still cannot vote electronically, despite having virtual question period. Today, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says he wants a hybrid House so that MPs can vote remotely in this pandemic, which is not going away anytime soon. A majority vote by MPs would be all that's needed to change the rules so they could vote from home.
Mercedes, you and I have talked before about all the rumors about a possible fall federal election. Where does that stand now?
Donna, it feels like an appetite for an election is dropping off amid the growing number of COVID-19 cases. Prime Minister Trudeau says he doesn't want an election, but he is confident that Elections Canada could hold one safely if it were to happen. As for now, the government is focusing on getting Canadians through the pandemic, and that will be what is reflected in the speech from the throne, he says. Donna?
All right, Mercedes Stephenson in Ottawa, thanks. South of the border, there are reports multiple staff at the White House have tested positive for COVID-19. President Trump confirmed today one staff person is positive. He gave no other details. However, members of the White House press pool say they were told multiple staff members are positive. Yesterday, President Trump hosted the leaders of Israel, the UAE, and Bahrain for the signing of a peace agreement. Canada's hard-hit oil and gas sector will be watching the Prime Minister's speech from the throne closely next week. There have been repeated requests for aid because of COVID-19 and a big dip in global oil prices. Now, OPEC says the economic hit from the pandemic will hurt global energy demand harder and for longer than previously feared. Though Alberta's Premier disputes any interpretation that the outlook for oil is gloomy. Eric Sorensen explains.
Climate change has been front and center this week. A new report on a warmer climate in the north, a water-laden hurricane in the south, and heat wave-induced wildfires in the west. The changing climate and an economy ravaged by COVID-19 has prompted a stark forecast from a major oil producer. BP says the growth of global oil consumption is coming to an end and will peak in the next few years if it hasn't already peaked.
Because the world needs change.
What's more, BP's CEO declared his 111-year-old oil company will transition to an integrated energy company.
We intend to reimagine energy so that we do so for the good of the planet and in a way that improves people's lives.
It's a sign of the future, increasing investment in renewables such as solar and wind by BP and other major oil companies. But to conclude that oil and gas is going away is fantasy, says Alberta's Premier.
And we know that you cannot function a modern industrial economy anytime now or in the foreseeable future without massive consumption of oil and gas.
Indeed, the post-COVID-19 economy will need oil and gas. It's still cheaper than green, says this energy analyst.
The lowest cost energy is what the households of the world need. So the incumbent fuels of coal, oil, and natural gas will get the job done.
But even oil companies are thinking beyond oil. Norway's Statoil changed its brand to Equinor. Petro-Canada is promoting itself as a leader in electric vehicle charging stations. Alberta remains focused on producing oil and offsetting the effects with programs like carbon capture.
Alberta thinks it will be able to continue to compete in a global oil market that's seen declining demand over the long term. It's really risky, especially when we have other options at our fingertips.
Canada is a country that's been built on resource extraction. And the reality is, if we're going to address climate change, we have to change that model.
It's not clear whether oil consumption will speed up or slow down after the pandemic. BP, for one, isn't waiting to find out.
A tenfold increase in low-carbon investment.
Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
Montreal-based Bombardier has sold off its train division to a European company for hundreds of millions of dollars less than it hoped. The deal is valued at $8.4 billion US. Bombardier will only get $4 billion from Alstom because the French train giant is assuming much of the division's debt. The sale works out to about $350 million less than what the two sides had agreed upon in February. Bombardier still has more than $9 billion in debt. For decades, Bombardier has received billions of dollars in federal and provincial subsidies and loan guarantees. U.S. lawmakers blame what they call a culture of concealment at Boeing and flawed regulation for those two crashes involving the 737 MAX 8 jet. A congressional committee report released today chastised the jet manufacturer and the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration. The Democratic chair of the committee says Boeing and the FAA gambled with public safety in the critical time period between the two crashes. The first, a Lion Air flight, went down off Indonesia in October 2018. Less than 5 months later, an Ethiopian Airlines flight crashed after takeoff. 346 people were killed in the two crashes. An 18-month-long investigation determined Boeing failed in its design and development of the MAX, and the FAA failed in its oversight of Boeing and its certification of the aircraft. It also scrutinized the close ties between the company and the regulator. The global fleet of MAX 8s has been grounded since March of 2019, and Boeing is still working to recertify those jets. Global News has learned Justin Burke, the man convicted of killing police officers in New Brunswick in 2014, is in the hospital after a drug overdose. Multiple sources have told Global News that Burke overdosed last week at the Atlantic Institution in Reynouse, New Brunswick. Correctional Service Canada would not comment on the matter, citing privacy concerns. Burke killed 3 RCMP officers and injured 2 others. He was taken into custody after a nearly 30-hour manhunt, and he is serving a life sentence. Hurricane Sally slams into the southeastern U.S., coming up the path of destruction and what is still to come. Hurricane Sally made landfall early this morning in Alabama and along the Florida Panhandle, and the damage is devastating. Punishing winds and heavy rain brought down trees and led to catastrophic flooding. Many homes and businesses are swamped. Sally has now been downgraded to a tropical storm, but it's just one of 4 ominous weather systems churning in the Atlantic right now. As Jackson Protzko reports, officials are warning thousands may be in the path of rising water in the days to come.
A slow-motion disaster arrived along the Gulf Coast. Hurricane Sally is a roaring storm moving at a snail's pace, delivering unprecedented amounts of rain as it slowly moves inland at walking speed, while winds whip at everything in its path.
We had strong winds for a long period of time. Instead of just for a few hours, it was for 12 hours.
In parts of Alabama and the Florida Panhandle, there's extensive damage to buildings. A huge section of a bridge leading out of Pensacola collapsed after being struck by a construction barge. In Alabama, this marina was decimated and dozens of boats sank. They're just beginning to tally up the damage.
We're going to try survive this. We're going to try go through this. And we're just going to try to be safe.
But the real story is the catastrophic rainfall, nearly a meter in some areas. Downtown Pensacola is underwater, and flooding is expected to spread across several states over the coming days.
Catastrophic and life-threatening flash flooding is ongoing right now with Sally along the Florida and Alabama coast.
Sally is part of an unusually active hurricane season, with 4 named storms churning in the Atlantic at the same time. One more storm and forecasters will run out of names. They'll have to use the Greek alphabet.
Right now we are in the peak of hurricane season for the Atlantic, and typically it ends around November 15th or November 30th.
There's no reason to expect the rest of hurricane season to be any quieter, with an ample supply of warm ocean water on hand, leaving residents up and down the coast to watch the forecast while they pick up the pieces. Jackson Prosco, Global News, Washington.
Improving weather conditions in the Pacific Northwest are raising hopes of possibly getting the upper hand on those wildfires in Washington state and parts of Oregon. But winds inland are picking up in central Oregon, where fires are reaching areas untouched by flames for decades. The lakeside tourist city of Detroit, Oregon, has lost nearly all its businesses and public buildings, including City Hall. Officials are warning the area is still extremely dangerous and residents should not return home. And there's no relief in sight in California. Gusting winds and low humidity are fueling more unpredictable fires that have already burned more than 1 million hectares since August 15th. Fire crews have managed to save the historic Mount Wilson Observatory near Los Angeles. The Bobcat fire came within 150 meters of the facility last night. The observatory is where astronomers confirmed galaxies exist outside the Milky Way. Still ahead, how to avoid a season of sickness. What happens when a pandemic mixes with the flu? COVID-19 is top of mind for many Canadians right now, and health experts are warning about what's to come this fall and winter. Flu season is just weeks away. Under normal circumstances, seasonal sickness tends to push hospitals to the brink. Add the impact of the pandemic, and there's concern about dueling flu and coronavirus outbreaks. Heather Yourex-West looks at what's being done to prepare for it.
It arrives every year, not long after kids return to class. The flu. On top of COVID-19, grandmother Brenda Rowland admits she's a little worried about the months ahead.
I am concerned, and we've had the flu shots in the past. And I think we're going to do it again this year.
Flu season for me is certainly a concern. So even without COVID, flu is always a concern at this time of the year because we know that you see an epidemic of cases and it can often strain the hospital because of people requiring both hospitalization on the ward and ICU beds.
It's why this year the flu vaccine may be more important than ever. And research out of the University of British Columbia suggests demand will be high. After surveying 3,000 families across 6 countries, 54% said they plan to get the flu shot, up 16 percentage points from the year before. That's prompted the Public Health Agency of Canada to order more vaccine, 13 million doses for this season, compared to 11.2 million last year.
I'm thinking of doing it this year because just be safe than sorry.
The symptoms for both illnesses are the same, but while COVID-19 is usually mild for children, the flu can hit very young kids hard. And so far, doctors don't know what happens if children get sick with both viruses at the same time.
We don't have data to speak to it, but I would presume and assume and worry, unfortunately, that children co-infected by both COVID-19 and influenza likely will have a worse outcome than children infected by either of them individually.
The flu is also particularly dangerous for seniors. Provinces are still working out how best to distribute this year's vaccine. Alberta and Ontario plan to distribute the high-dose formula to long-term care residents who are at the highest risk. But the vaccine won't be available in Canada for another month. And with COVID-19 cases on the rise, it's difficult to know what the situation across the country will be once flu season finally arrives. Heather Yourex-West, Global News, Calgary.
Freedom with love. Up next, a couple's whirlwind fight for justice. This next story is a bit of an antidote to all the bad news these days. It's about a professional athlete, a basketball star, who put her career on hold to embark on a journey for justice. Maya Moore took up the case of a man she believed was wrongfully convicted. And as Robin Gill reports, her journey turned into a love story.
I'm Maya Moore.
And I'm Jonathan Irons.
For 13 years, Maya Moore and Jonathan Irons have been considered a team. Well, now they've put a ring on it.
We got married a couple months ago, and we're excited to just continue this new chapter of life together.
On ABC's Good Morning America, the couple announced they tied the knot 2 months ago.
A few years ago, we both acknowledged that we had really strong feelings for each other. So much so that, I wanted to marry her, but at the same time protect her, because being in a relationship with a man in prison is extremely difficult and painful.
Moore first developed a friendship with Irons when she was 18. They met through a prison ministry. He was serving a 50-year sentence for assault and burglary. Moore, who went on to have a career in the women's NBA, began advocating for changes to policing and the legal system. In 2019, she decided to take a leave of absence from the WNBA to help Irons.
His convictions be vacated.
A year later, a judge overturned his conviction, citing a fingerprint at the crime scene that was never produced as evidence. It could have saved him the 23 years he spent in jail.
I feel like I can live life now, man. I'm free.
Moore hasn't played ball in almost 2 years, and she isn't in a rush to go back to the court.
Right now, I am trying to really just breathe from this long, long battle.
Her fight for social justice isn't over, but for now, it's time to reflect on a story about liberty and love. Robin Gill, Global News.
And that is Global National for this Wednesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is a bird's eye view of the sunset over Surrey, BC. We'd love to see your Canada. Please email it to viewers@globalnational.com. Thanks for watching. I hope to see you here again tomorrow. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.